So, we are embodied beings. We live and move in real spaces, like this one, and those spaces, when they are our own, are further embodiments of who we are and what we believe. They also speak of our deepest longings. They tell our deepest stories. I forget why we chose that picture. That's the dog sledding picture. Anyway, this weekend is about exploring the stories behind the text messages, the Facebook comments, and the Instagram images we shoot through space every day. Stories reveal the worlds we inhabit. According to the American Heritage Dictionary, the word inhabit includes close connection, permanence, and a sense of immediacy, to be present. All of this requires something of us. To be close means to take risk. To live somewhere permanently means to be known. Just ask my husband. And to be, because I'm always there. So, to be present means to pay attention and to give of yourself. Stories take us out of ourselves and our present. They offer a deeper perspective on the lives we lead. For the next, I had half hour, I'll read fast. Let's think about our interior spaces, the way that the environments we create to rest, work, eat, and drink, talk with family, engage our friends, embody our own interiors, our beliefs, our hopes, our longings, our personal stories. Let's think about our lives inside out. Every house is a story. Large or small, well-built or rickety, a house starts as an image in someone's mind. Whether it's a Palladian mansion in the Veneto, a developer designed and built tract house in the California suburbs, or a cardboard and tin hut at a garbage dump in the Philippines, that house was created to meet a human need. Often in human history, as we have seen, houses have been the fruit of dreams as well as necessity. Dreams of beauty and loving families, as well as shelter from the literal and figurative storms of life. In European tradition, at least, houses often have names. These monikers signify something out of the owner's history or reflect the geography or flora and fauna of their location. Names like Waterside, Oak Creek Cottage, or Traveler's Rest. Our house stands in that tradition. Casa de los Peregrinos, the house of the Pilgrims, grew out of the experience and dreams of my husband, Howard Fieldstad Ahmanson Jr., and me. So the first idea I want to share is the story of a pilgrimage. Howard and I understand life to be a pilgrimage. We are citizens of two countries, this earth and our heavenly home, as Augustine, who you see there, said in his 5th century classic De Civitate Dei, the City of God. C.S. Lewis, who loved nothing more than to sit by the fireside with his slippers on, chatting to a friend, understood what Augustine was talking about. In The Problem of Pain, he wrote that our lives never provide safety, though we have plenty of fun and some ecstasy, because the security we crave would teach our hearts to rest in this world and pose an obstacle to God. Lewis concludes, a few moments of happy love, a landscape, a symphony, a merry meeting with our friends, a bathe or a football match have no such tendency. Our Father refreshes us on the journey with some pleasant inns, but will not encourage us to mistake them for home. We are pilgrims, looking for those inns, real, tangible inns that mirror the greater reality to come. For example, in Hebrews 1:1, we are told, Abraham was looking for a city whose architect and builder is God. Hebrews 13 says, for here we do not have an enduring city, but we're looking for the city to come. A second idea shaping our vision is the notion that we were made not to look at beauty, but to be part of it. Puritan divine Jonathan Edwards said that it is God's beauty, the beauty of the holiness of Jesus Christ, embodied beauty in the Son of God, must draw us to God. And the psalmist summed it up in Psalm 27:4. One thing I have desired of the Lord, even that I may inhabit the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the fair beauty of the Lord and to visit his temple. In his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, C.S. Lewis wrote that we don't just want to see beauty, we want to be in it, to receive it into ourselves, to bathe in it, to become part of it. He wrote, "At present we're on the outside of the world, the wrong side of the door, but all the leaves of the New Testament are rustling with the rumor that it will not always be so. Someday, God willing, we shall get in." Alexei Lidov, director of the Center for World Culture at Moscow State University, says that the Christian church, especially in the Eastern tradition, has long understood this. Churches were what Lidov calls spatial icons, places where the art, architecture, decoration, music, incense, feel of the wall marble, the liturgy of the service all work together as one entity. When the faithful went to church on Sunday, they entered into beauty. That was the common understanding until the Enlightenment, when philosophers turned human beings into observers of, no longer participants in, beauty. Howard and I wanted our house to get back to the early Christian concept. A third idea is the notion that tangible things, works of art, furniture, sculptures, fabrics, light fixtures, are neither just luxuries nor distractions from the real spiritual purpose of our life. As long as they do not become objects of worship, they can be touchstones, mirrors for the glory and beauty of God. Further, in The Weight of Glory, Lewis warns us not to trust too much in books or music or experiences in which we taste joy and beauty. It isn't that what they are in themselves, but what came through them that is important. And what came through them was longing. In a posthumously published essay, Beauty in the Light of Redemption, 20th century Roman Catholic philosopher Dietrich von Hildebrand wrote that books, music, works of art, pieces of furniture do provide real joys. He says this beauty of form is a pedestal, a mirror, a pointer. A real tangible reality is both in these objects or sounds or visions, and it transcends them. Tuscan villas, the frescoes of Masaccio in the Carmine, the Dome of Florence, he wrote, are not connected with beauty of form merely by thoughts. They are not ideas that these express thereby, but in their quality, they speak about another higher reality. They make God known. Next, for a long time, I had the notion that beauty is inside and out. It's a concept I learned from my grandmother, Selma Green, who was a master seamstress. There she is, isn't she cute? She could take your measurements, look at a picture of a dress you liked in a magazine, and cut a pattern to make that very dress. It was quite a wonderful grandmother to have around. We would go shopping for clothes. She would lift up the skirt of a dress and look at the finish on the seams inside. Most often, she just shook her head at the shoddy work. Everything she did had to be as good on the inside as it was on the outside. That stuck with me. Our house had to be the same. This, too, is pilgrimage. It is a quest to get things right. And von Hildebrand affirms that the quality of our tangible creations can make God known. Confirmation of this quest comes perhaps surprisingly from the computer world. Designers at Apple see the creation of beauty in their products as a process that is inside out. Steve Jobs, of all people, said in 1996, "Design is a funny word. Some people think design is about how it looks. But of course, if you dig deeper, it's really how it works." Simplicity is key. In a September 19, 2013 USA Today article, Johnny Ive, Apple's design wizard since 1992, said simplicity goes back to the idea that, quote, "You're trying to define the essence of something and come up with a solution that seems utterly inevitable and obvious. And those details matter." Ive again. This is terribly important and at the heart of what we do. We care about how to design the inside of something you'll never see because we think it's the right thing to do. One last piece of background. Clearly, when you marry someone, for those of you who are married, you know this, anything can happen and probably will. You think you know what you're doing, but you could be wrong. Marriage is a never-ending adventure. There's the adventurer right there. And that is true of designing a home to live in as well. Fortunately, Howard and I are both Scandinavian by background and both love the same kind of design, the arts and crafts tradition, give or take. The term does not refer to macrame wall hangings or tie-dyed t-shirts from the 1970s. It describes a late 19th century architecture and design movement in England, Europe, and the United States. William Morris, one of the main proponents of the movement, said, "Have nothing in your house which you do not know to be useful and believe to be beautiful." The ideas behind the movement: first, Morris and friends were determined to use local materials and draw on the patterns of vernacular architecture. What you're looking at is Red House, the home he and Philip Webb designed for Morris. And these vernacular forms have been in use in England for centuries. Then the work was to be done by hand, craftsmanship critical to the process. Third, every aspect of the house, from the design of the roof to the embroidered hangings at the windows, was to connect the house to the place where it stood. Finally, nothing was to be uniform or standard. All was to show the touch of the human mind and hand. In America, architects like Frank Lloyd Wright were not so concerned with eliminating machine-made materials or furnishings, but they did share concern for the appropriateness of materials used and the relationship between a building and its geographical location. The stars of the California branch of the movement worked in Pasadena. They were Charles Sumner and Henry Mather Green, known as Green and Green. Their work inspired what is still called Bungalow Heaven. Their masterpiece, the Gamble House, is a museum. They worked with top craftsmen. The materials were critical: tile, wood, stained glass, brick, and stone. Their houses seemed to grow out of the very earth on which they stood. Where do Howard and I come in? Well, I had grown up in a small Midwestern town, there it is, that boasted more than 200 arts and crafts style homes. In fact, the house right behind that SUV is the house that I lived in for 8 years, I think, of my life. I grew up riding my bike up and down the streets of town, admiring those houses, though I didn't know what they were. And Howard had not only grown up in California and gone to college near Pasadena, but his family home was the house Frank Lloyd Wright, son of Frank Lloyd Wright, designed for the virtuoso violinist Sasha Heifetz in Newport Beach. When Howard built his first home, there we are, it was in the style of Green and Green, which was one reason I married him. So to apply all this to there were other reasons too, but that was big. So to apply all this to our house, we go to 2001, the year we engaged the Bozeman, Montana architect Paul Bertelli to start thinking about a house on 4 lots on Ocean Boulevard in Corona del Mar. The first house Bertelli had been commissioned to design on the California coast. The process began with interviews, lots of interviews. A first design was in process in the fall of 2002 when we 3 Ahmansons, including our son David, and 4 friends, Paul Marshall, Ed and the late Diane Nippers, and then Father David Anderson, walked the last 100 kilometers of the Camino de Compostela across northern Spain, making us official Peregrinos. Pilgrims. The Camino came into being in the 9th century when pilgrims started making their way across Europe to the shrine of St. James, Santiago the Greater, the first apostle to be martyred and one whose bones somehow wound up buried in a field not far from the sea in Galicia, the far northwestern province of Spain. From the 9th century to the present, you see all the routes, that's what that map is. Millions of men and women have walked across Europe to that shrine at Santiago, one of the Roman Catholic Church's 3 official pilgrim sites, the others being Rome and Jerusalem. Aching feet and knees, bruised shins, and sunburned faces aside, the Camino was a glorious experience. The camaraderie, the food, the wine, the travelers' tales, the ancient churches and monasteries, the sculptures and frescoes, the ever-present yellow arrows pointing the way, the taste of fresh Spanish melon at a roadside stop, and the stamping of our passports at official stops along the way. There we are eating melon. Our group had registered with the priest in charge of pilgrims, there is such a person in León, Spain, and received official passports. At the end of the journey in Santiago, the stamps proved we had each walked the 100 kilometers required. Freshly signed certificates with our names in Latin, more or less, proclaimed this fact for all to see. The Spanish word for pilgrim is peregrino, and so as the house on Ocean Boulevard grew, it became clear to us that its name could only be Casa de los Peregrinos, House of the Pilgrims. The name is carved below a bas-relief of Santiago next to the front door. Below it are 3 seashells, symbols of St. James, that we bought in Santiago to mark the end of our journey. Pilgrims carried shells to dip into streams for water and to use for plates, and they also carried gourds, which you see him holding there, to carry water, and a staff to help them on the way. Just inside the front door, we hung our official certificates, the evidence of our status. The house is filled with references to St. James, a stained glass window by Danish artist Peter Brandes, a wooden santo carved by Rosemary Romero Cash from Los Angeles, and numerous seashells set into the walls, their message, "Welcome, Pilgrims." And being pilgrims, we knew that our house had to embody the message not only of our pilgrimage, but of our destination. The house is situated on an east-west axis. You enter the front gate, designed and made by New York artist Albert Paley, and you see a tile of the golden shell pointing you forward on your journey. Up the stairs and onto the terrace, you enter a garden with 2 sculptures connected to our histories. On one side is a sea lion, originally designed by California artist Millard Sheets for the house Howard grew up in, less than a mile away on Harbor Island. The other is an abstract work made from Paley's first design for another part of our house. Step under the portico, and Santiago welcomes you. And over the door you read the first half of Christ's summary of the law. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. On the back of the bench by the door is carved the other half. Love your neighbor as yourself. The tone is set. You enter the door, step onto a replica of the tiles Antoni Gaudí designed for the streets of Barcelona, and look to the left. There you see our Peregrino certificates. Above them are 2 stained glass windows by Peter Brandes. One is the pilgrim window, all in blue with vertical lines showing forward movement, a staff, a gourd, and several faces, for we change when we go on pilgrimage. Next to it is a window in red with a face and a hand holding onto a cup for the thirsty pilgrim. The face is Christ, or your neighbor, welcoming you home. From there you enter another room, and straight ahead are glass doors leading to a walkway to the chapel with its back facing due east. The chapel is the energy source for the whole house, the spiritual energy source propelling us westward. I call it Resurrection Chapel because that is the goal of our pilgrimage. The door opens with a staff-like sculpture, and the building is topped by a cross pointing heavenward, both by Paley. When you enter, you step across the words, "Blessed are those whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on pilgrimage." There are 4 benches with kneelers, handmade of old wood from Montana. You walk forward across bricks given by Peter and his wife, Maja-Lisa Engelhardt, from a 13th century Danish church. They are laid in the shape of the cross. At last you come to the altar, for which Peter designed an image of the crucified Christ and the chalice and plate for the wine and bread of communion on top. Behind it is a huge stained glass window in red and yellow. It is a combination of the Last Supper and the Supper at Emmaus. Christ holds his crucified body in one hand and it becomes bread. In the other, he holds his bleeding, thorn-crowned head as it becomes the wine. He is faceless because Peter says he becomes known to us in the breaking of the bread. And he is alone because, again, as Peter says, we are all disciples. We are the body of Christ. And below the altar are written the words, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. He who lives and believes in me shall never die." Ancient Greeks and Romans divided their houses into public and private spaces with clearly delineated areas for worship. Our house follows that ancient model. The first floor is public. The living room was designed so that the furniture could be removed and chairs brought in for salons and retreats. Our largest crowd was 75 people from Makoto Fujimura, the first speaker in our house. The house was designed with large and small spaces, nooks and crannies connecting one to another. The object was to create a safe place for people to converse, to read, to think. Paul Bertelli calls it an architecture of hope, designed so that when you look into one space, it leads you on to the next and the next, a pilgrimage of hope. Of course, there is art. One wall of the living room was designed with niches for our collection of Noah's Arks, which are moved out during Advent to make way for our collection of nativity scenes from around the world. In the arts and crafts tradition, people wrote mottos and sayings on the walls, fitting the meaning to the space. Our motto, taken from Psalm 115, is carved in a beam just above the ark wall. Non nobis Domine, sed nomine, tuo da gloriam. Not to us, O Lord, but to your name be the glory. There is only one large wall for a painting, and it is home at the moment to Makoto Fujimura's soliloquy from the show that he did responding to paintings by Georges Rouault. Several years ago, we were able to acquire one of Rouault's two large paintings of the crucifixion. Without fully realizing what I was doing, I hung it in the entry so that if you stand in the right place, you can see Mako's painting and the Rouault together. Mako was, no surprise, the first to see the juxtaposition. On the way into the living room, you pass through one of three library annexes in the house. If you turn left, you find yourself in the withdrawing room. There you find more books and an ingle nook, a place to withdraw, a necessity in any self-respecting arts and crafts home. Set into the stone above the fireplace are three plaques we brought at the start of the Camino in León, Spain. They are replicas of the paintings of the months of the year in St. Isidore's Church, the chart of the Romanesque. We chose the months of our births, February, September, and November. The other critical room on the first floor is the dining room. I grew up designing, there I am with my two grandmothers and my mother. It's a frightening photo. I grew up designing, I'm the younger one there, okay? Anyway, I grew up designing tables with my mother, who is to my left in that picture, even going to the state fair every year just to see the table design competition. We often disagreed with the choice for winner. The greatest times were sitting around the table listening to people tell stories, combining the first and third of Abraham Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs, nourishment and community. And I grew up loving dishes. My mother had 2 sets of crystal dishes and a set of 24 place settings of sterling silver, this in a town of 7,000 in the middle of Iowa. She knew how to do things right. So one of my great loves is bringing people together around the dinner table for conversation and joy. We usually ask a question for each person to respond to, a way to bring the whole group together rather than being fragmented in little cliques here and there. My dream has always been a red dining room, and I got it. With fireplace. The paint job took more than 3 weeks and 7 or 8 layers, including the wax to reflect candlelight as the last. All the art in the room speaks of feasting. We have a copy of Peter Bruegel the Elder's famous wedding feast, probably done by his grandson. There are nursing Madonnas, and the table is an arts and crafts table. Also, in the arts and crafts decision, houses are designed with inside and outside rooms. So on the ground floor, most rooms open out into an outdoor extended space. The courtyard is the surprise, the magical space with running water. In medieval monastic cloisters, there was always a fountain near the dining room. I'm going to speed up because I'm over time. The lower level, we'll go to the lower levels, which means, Chris, we're skipping a bunch of pictures. So we're skipping, there's a flower garden that is after Emil Nolda's garden in Germany, and then there's a painting of the 3 of us. And then there's the lower level, which is sometimes a public space with wine cellar and dining room. It also houses the dish and storage rooms. Upstairs is private space, our library and bedrooms, closets, spaces to embroider and watch videos. The pièce de résistance, however, is the sun or breakfast room. I call it saving our marriage #1. When we were building the house, Howard told me that if he built this house, I had to eat breakfast at home. I told him that was fine, but I had to have a space I wanted to eat breakfast in. What would that be? Somewhere upstairs with lots of light. Well, he came through. This room is a delight. The view is priceless, which you don't see here. On one wall are landscape paintings from Britain, Canada, and the United States. On the ceiling is a quilt made of my father's shirts, just after he died in 1991. The motto here is, "Weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes in the morning." Whether in the dining room or the sunroom, feasting is celebrated in our home. Of course, that has biblical significance. Abraham prepared that feast for the angels after all. Job ends with a feast. Christ made wine for a feast, and the central ritual of the Christian faith is a feast, a reliving of the Last Supper, dining on our spiritual bread and wine. There will be feasting in the new heaven and new earth. Hebrews reminds us to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Inns along the way, tangible, real markers of where we are headed, pilgrims with a clear destination. 20 years ago, we told our staff not to let anyone know our address. We wanted to stay out of the public eye. Over time, we changed. We live across the street from a city park and a state beach. Daily, people take pictures of our house, sometimes even wedding pictures. We invite our neighbors to dinner. We are involved in a fight to keep the fire pits on the beach as a gathering place for families and friends who cannot afford to live in our neighborhood. Our house is used regularly for retreats, mostly hosted by us, but not always. Our living room is the setting for salons and discussions. Our dining room is a place of celebration, conversation, and connection. It is a risk to be known, to pay attention to the place where we live, to tell our stories, to give of ourselves, to each other and to our neighbors, is nothing if not scary. But it is also the first step toward our eternal home, where we will dwell together with God and with all those called by his name. Eternal community. We will inhabit the beauty and glory of God together and make together a never-ending story. 1 John 3:2 puts it this way: Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Thanks very much.